So tomorrow's my birthday. Tonight, though, by the way, I'm celebrating my birthday by watching the Detroit Lions play the New England Patriots at 7 o'clock at Buffalo Wild Wings and Grapevine. You're all invited. I'll be the one with the Matthew Stafford jersey on. So tomorrow, I turn 39. 39. Yep. For the first time. Which means, Taylor or Vanessa, I'm not sure, who was it? Somebody Googled average life expectancy of a man, and it's 78, which means I am exactly halfway there tomorrow. So that means I have a right to a midlife crisis. So, because Bobby Clayton told me I should do it, this is for you, Bobby. Does it look as good as I think it looks? Of course, this is the week Kelsey would come to take pictures. This will be on the website for 10 years. So, this is my midlife moment, according to actuaries. So this is my halftime speech. As I reflect upon the first half of my life, what is it in the first half of my life that can help me in the second half of my life? Started thinking about that, and one word has just been coming up over and over and over again in my mind. One word has just been entrenched in everything I've been thinking, and that word is trust. Trust. As I reflect upon the first half of my life, the one word that means so much to me going forward is trust. Trusting God. Trusting God. As we read the readings today, I think there's a couple ways that are important that we can learn about trusting God. Trusting God. First, I want to go to the gospel and what Jesus says about welcoming a child, being kind to a child. How important it is to be kind to a child. When Jesus talks about a child, he's talking about somebody who, in that culture, if you did a favor for, they really couldn't do a favor back for you. If you were kind to a child, the child really didn't have anything they can offer you in return. Friday night, anybody get any rain Friday night? Anybody get wet Friday night? So it just started raining and it wouldn't stop. And we were getting water in our backyard to our back door, and I thought we were going to flood. And then we looked out the front door, and our neighbor was getting all our water that wasn't coming at our back door, was going at their front door. And so they were out with buckets, and so I decided, I need to go get sandbags. And so 9:30 Friday night, I jumped in our car to go get sandbags, and one of the streets in Trophy Club was closed down, so I had to go. I've got 20 sandbags, and I pulled up to their house, and we put a bunch in front of their door, and then they came and helped me in our backyard, and we put sandbags out. And it's nice, a neighbor, you help a neighbor, and a neighbor helps you, right? It's part of, being in good relationship and being a good neighbor. But when Jesus says be kind to a child, it's be kind to somebody who can do nothing for you in return. I remember when I was about 10 years old, my parents moved us out into the country. We lived in a suburb of Detroit, and then we moved out into the country, which is now a suburb, but 30 years ago it wasn't. And we had, in Romeo, Michigan, they have the Peach Festival at Labor Day every year. And so my parents had a big party where they invited their friends from the city out into the country, and people brought tents, and people stayed over, and we went to the big parade the next day. And I was talking to one of my dad's friends, Gary Rutledge, about how I always wanted to sleep out under the stars. And he said, you know what, I'll sleep out under the stars with you. And so we built a fire and we laid sleeping bags, and we spent the night looking up at the stars and talking about all the different things. And I remember it so fondly because it was the first time in my life that an adult looked at me as more than just my parents' child, that they took an interest in me, that they were kind to me, and that they went out of their way to have a conversation with me. And I felt important for the first time, right? I felt in the eyes of an adult that I was important. When you are kind to somebody, you make them feel important. And so it's important for us to trust God when God says, be kind to others, because everyone is important. The psalm says, hear my prayer, O Lord. I think we should trust God that when we pray, God hears our prayers. Trust that God hears our prayers, and even though we don't always understand why God is answering it a certain way. I think most of us, when we pray for something, we have a vision of what we would like God to do. We have a vision of what we think it's going to look like on the other side of the prayer once God, does what God does. And that doesn't always happen. I remember graduating from seminary and praying to God for a church to work at, for a call, for a congregation to serve as pastor. And I was interviewing at a congregation in Fort Worth and at a congregation in Dallas. And I visited those places, and I saw the pulpits, and I saw the pastor's office, and I had this vision of me working there. I had this vision of me preaching there. I had a vision of me sitting at that desk, and as I was praying, Lord, please make it so. I had no idea that God was going to bring me in touch with some people in Grapevine who wanted to start a church. But God did. And the first night I met with the 7 or 8 of those, I met with them. I was excited to meet with them, and I was excited to tell them, John, you were there. Remember what I said? Ken Mingus didn't remember. You don't remember what I said?
Well, I'm not a mission starter.
Yes, thank you. Dee, you got it. Yeah, the first thing I said was, I'm really excited for you guys, and I'll help you till I get a job, but I am not the guy for you. This is not it's too much work. I don't know how to do it. I don't want to work that hard. And I can already see me preaching in those pulpits, right? Sometimes God answers a prayer, and we have no idea what God is going to do. But when we look back, we say, wow, it's amazing, God. You knew better than I did. So we trust that God hears our prayers, and we trust that God answers them even if the answer isn't what we expect it to be. So there's some birthday cake back there. And I had some earlier today, and it's affecting me in funny ways, so I don't know where the cake came from. Even when we expect God, when the answer isn't what we expect it to be. That's what I'm trying to say. But then we pray for people, right? We pray for people. We all know people who get sick, and we pray for them, and we pray with expectation, and we pray with hope that God is going to do something good for them in their lives, that God is going to heal them, that God is going to answer our prayer, and it doesn't always work out the way we think it is. Sometimes there are miracle stories. Sometimes people live longer than expected. Sometimes good comes from prayer, and sometimes we can't truly make sense of why things happen. I will tell you, as I've been reflecting back on the first half of my life, I think back to the first quarter of my life, the first 20 years of my life, I never would have expected, I never in any way, shape, or form would have thought that in my life I would encounter so much death. I never thought that it would be my job to sit next to people as they take their last breath. I never thought that I would be with families and comfort them right immediately after the death of a loved one. I never imagined that that would be something that I would be capable of doing. And the thing about death is it comes in so many different ways. It comes in unexpected. It comes at times where no one is ready for it. And we turn to God and say, God, why? How could you have let this happen? And I've come to the conclusion that the most important thing we can do as far as trusting God is trusting what it says in Romans today. Whether we live or whether we die, we are the Lord's. Whether we live or whether we die, we are the Lord's. And the only conclusion that I have come to, having seen as much death as I have, having talked to people in the midst of their grief, the only way that this makes any sense at all in the grand scheme of a loving God is that heaven is that wonderful. Is that heaven is the best place there ever was. And that when we get there, we will look back on this life and say, that was good, but it does not compare to this. I don't know why I spent my entire life afraid of coming here. Whether we live or whether we die, we are the Lord's. Whether we live or whether we die, God has got us. God has good things planned for us. In my life, it's been a lot of good. Been a lot of wonderful moments, a lot of victories, a lot of successes. There's been a lot of bad too. There's been a lot of bad. A lot of losses, a lot of failures on my part, a lot of letting people down. And I know that going forward, there's going to be good and there's going to be bad. There's going to be victories and there's going to be failures. But I know going forward into the second half of my life that because I trust God, I can overcome anything. I can get through anything. Because we all trust God, we can get through anything, together and individually. Amen.